Hi, everyone, and welcome to A Word with Kelly Scott Reed. We're here today with Erin Jacobs, author of let me get the title right, Time Will Break the World. Welcome.
Hi, Kelly. How are you?
I'm awesome, and I'm particularly awesome because I get to talk to you today. So, for the people who watch A Word a lot, they know that I interview authors. I do a little research sometimes. Sometimes they give me things, and you had sent over this book for me to read. And when I went in blind reading, I realized that it was based on the Chowchilla abduction of an entire school bus. I think it was 26 children in like 1976. I think it was July
Yep,
15th,
July 15th,
1976.
1976. Yep.
I leapt off the sofa. I got so excited because this is one of my favorite true crime stories. Absolutely fascinating, intense, terrifying, any word you could possibly come up with. So I was very excited to speak with you about it. But before we start, I'd like to find out a little bit about you, the
Sure.
the Erin Jacobs. So where are
The
you
Aaron
coming to
Jacobs
us
film.
from?
I am talking to you today from Brooklyn, New York.
Awesome. So you can breathe
Yes.
now. We're in Rochester, so we had the Canadian air coming down.
It was scary. It was
Mhm.
there's all the
Mhm.
pictures people were posting about the sky and the sun and everything was blotted out, but just walking around the streets, you'd see people on the sidewalk and everybody kind of give each other this look like, is this okay? Are we going to be okay about this? So yeah, we had a scary 48 hours there.
Yeah, it was rough. And I saw pictures from New York, friends from New York sent them up. And, we, it looked like a Wes Anderson sky here. Like it was
Yeah,
orangey and
orange.
everything had like a little bit of a mist across
Yeah.
it. And you are a writer.
Yes,
You wrote the book, Time Will Break the World. Could you tell us a little bit about that? I kind of gave a little inkling, but tell us
sure.
about the book.
Okay, sure. So the book takes place in 1984 on the second to last day of summer school. And while the bus is driving home, two gunmen hijack it. They come on board, they take the driver off, they take the 19 students off, and they put them into two vans where they drive them around for hours without any water, without any bathroom breaks, without any ventilation or food. And they drive them to a stone quarry owned by the men's family. And at the stone quarry, they've already buried a moving van. And they put all the kids and the bus driver into the buried moving van. They cover it up with a metal plate, weigh it down, and they leave them there, basically burying them alive. Now, they're doing this because they're trying to extort a ransom from the state. And as you mentioned, this is based on a real life crime that happened in 1976 in Chowchilla, California. And I have to say that I'm so impressed that you've heard of it because I've talked about this with so many people and almost no one's heard of it. I only found out about it a few years ago. I was reading an article in the newspaper about Frederick Woods, who was sort of the mastermind of the crime. He since got out of prison a couple of years ago, but at the time he'd been denied parole again. And the article was mentioning this crime as if it was sort of common knowledge, but I'd never heard about it. And so I started looking it up, and that was when I couldn't believe what I was reading. I couldn't believe that this had actually happened. At the time, I really didn't think I was even going to ever write about it. It was just one of these things that sort of, one of these nagging things that just sort of stays with you. And then the book sort of takes, the book starts with the kidnapping, and then it flashes forward 30 years into the future, where two of the young girls who are twin sisters, their names are Emily and Brenda, they are now trying to keep one of the perpetrators in prison. He's up for parole. And so they create a documentary about the crime in an effort to raise awareness. It's they're victim activists, and there creates a feud between the two families. And that's what the book is basically about.
That's one of the things I absolutely loved about the book because um, I knew about Chowchilla, but it's so intriguing because of the time that it's set in. Also, you kept it set in a time where it would be feasible for something like this to be pulled off, like people vanishing without a trace,
Yeah,
parents not knowing because no cell phones, no
nothing.
internet, no GPS tracking. So people could just disappear off the
Yeah,
planet.
absolutely.
Um, it's so interesting because you're talking about the quarry. And one of the things I really loved about the book is I know Brenda's name, Emily's name, Dudu, Viscosi. What is the name of that guy?
Oh, Lance
You have
Judo
great
Viscuso.
Viscuso, which I love
Yes,
that
the
name
class
because
bully.
viscosity. Yeah.
Yes, he's the
um,
he's the class
yeah,
bully.
the class bully. The names, the characters really stick with you
Thank you.
um, in this book. And as a matter of fact, like I said, I heard the story before and I knew somewhat about it, but you do take a really different look at it by going into the future. There's
Right.
like, seems like you're taking personal accounts, general account, and then forwarding to the future to Emily and Brenda. And I really love that.
Right. So one of the things that I liked, well, originally my plan was to just do a fictionalized version of the crime. And I ran into a lot of problems with it, mostly limitations of my own as a writer. I just couldn't recreate, California in the 70s. I was probably a little bit daunted by all the great California novelists. I'm not a West Coast guy. 1976 is a little bit before my time. So I wanted to move it closer to a time that, I could work with. So that's where we came to 1984. I moved it to the East Coast. But as I started writing it, what really intrigued me, the question that I kept trying to figure out, that's what pushed the book, was if you go through something like this when you're 10 years old, and again, the whole thing takes place, the kidnapping is a one-day thing. It's not this prolonged years of abuse. It's this one thing. It's a really bad thing. But how does the rest of your life play out? What does it look like when you're 40 years old now? Is this the worst thing that's ever happened to you that looms over everything you do? Or, is it something that you've sort of worked with and reconciled? And so that's why the idea of having twin sisters was also kind of interesting to me, because that two people can go through the same thing and come out of it differently. Everybody handles trauma differently. Some people are just naturally more resilient than others. But what if they're biologically the same person? They're genetically the same person. They look alike. They're from the same family. What happens in that case? Would you expect them to turn out exactly the same? And I mean, my answer is no. They're pretty different people. But then also by flashing forward, I was able to revisit a lot of the characters, as they get older. That was sort of one of the things when the sisters decide to make this documentary, they seek out the other kids they grew up with. So, a lot of the other kids get a turn to sort of speak their piece.
How did you come up with the title, and what does the title mean to you?
Okay, so the title I stole. It's the name of a song. It's a song title. It's by the band The Silver Jews. So basically, when I was writing the first draft of this novel, at the time it didn't really have a title. It was a Word doc. It was probably bus kidnapping doc. So I was looking for a placeholder title. And David Berman, who was the songwriter for the Silver Jews, just passed away. So I was binging on a lot of their music, and I just thought it was a very cool title. As I finished writing the book and I went back to revise it, it does also refer to a moment in the book. It signifies this part where they're buried, they're underground, and the bus driver sort of realizes that they've only been down there for less than a day. And he starts talking about how, since he's a man in his 60s, a day doesn't mean as much to him as it does to a child. The hours are rated differently. He's had so many. So time, all other things being equal, time will break the world given enough, if it goes on long enough, I guess it's a sort of reference to entropy and, that kind of stuff.
That's very cool. I liked the title, and I was like, well, I can't place that. That's really cool.
So it's a song. You can go on YouTube or Spotify.
I am going to look that band up because I have never heard of them, and I'm a music freak, and I'm shocked. But no, are they a regional band? Like, are they New Yorker based?
No, I think. Where was David Berman from? He grew up, I think, in the South. He was friends with Stephen Malkmus. He was friends with Stephen Malkmus from Pavement, played on a couple of the records. I think he knows those guys from college. They went to college together. But he was a poet, David Berman. He wrote a book that came out 20-something years ago called Actual Air. It was a collection of his poetry that's excellent. Mm-hmm. So his lyrics are these very, strange and idiosyncratic. And he really can't sing, but the music is sort of like Americana and has a country-ish vibe to it. It's very cool. They're good.
That's cool because I'm a Wilco fan, which is Americana country vibe. So yeah, sounds great. I'm going to look them up. Yeah, just to move on to some questions in general, just about you as a writer, your process. Could you describe a time in your life where you realized that language had power?
Well, language, let me think of this, a good moment. I mean, the written word has always been pretty important to me. From the time I could read, I've always loved reading. So I understood the power of that. But I do remember this. Okay, so I was in the Cub Scouts, and we had to do this fundraiser where we had to like literally go door to. It was not, they weren't Girl Scout cookies, but it was, I guess, whatever the Cub Scout equivalent was. There's some sort of like there was a brochure you would hand people, and you would do that. And I was terrible at it. I mean, I was young, maybe 7 years old, but I do remember like sort of getting into the hang. I remember the first time I said something to a person door to door. Most of the time they'd say no, thank you, and close the door on me. But the first time somebody was sort of interested, and I was like, it's because of something I said. I either said something that made the guy laugh, or I did something that caught his attention. And I was like, that wasn't because of what I was selling. It was just because I said something that worked, and that was it. And so I was like, well, this is, so the answer question, that's pretty a reason when I sort of realized that words do have power.
Oh, that's really cool. I mean, when you think about like as a little kid, to be bad at sales isn't necessarily a bad thing.
No, right.
I know, it's just funny to me, like
cleaning up.
like you come up with like, hey, with a little suit on. I hated stuff like that. I never wanted to like force people to get something they didn't want because I would have hated that. So people were always like, you should get into sales. I'm like, I would hate it. I go, that's okay. You don't have to buy anything. We're fine. That's how I would do my sales.
Wow.
You have another book called The Abundant Life.
Yes.
And what's so that all about?
That's a totally different kind of novel from Time Will Break the Word. That's a satirical novel. It's about a Jewish family that avoids bankruptcy by marketing products to evangelical and fundamentalist Christians. So it's basically the oldest son. He's the narrator. He returns. He was in jail for a few years. He comes home and he's about 30 years old. He finds his family is just in shambles. His father's business is going, he's going bankrupt. The parents have marital issues. His younger sister has issues. Everybody, the house has got termite damage. It's just this whole shit show. So he doesn't really have any marketable skills of his own, and he is sort of morally ethical. So he comes up with this plan, and they sort of hook up with this sort of Joel Osteen type faith healer, mega church guy, who's also his own type of ethical nightmare to sell these products. And it's can the family save itself by doing this questionable thing? So that was the first one.
I love that. That's great. I love it a lot because that's on my list now. Because that's also, I think that's great, and that's the type of reading I love to do. A little bit of humor. I was just introducing my son to Confederacy of Dunces.
Oh,
I was like, you have got to read. You got to read this. And he's like, I'll do a book on tape or whatever, audio book on tape. How old am I? What is it called? Audible.
Yeah, Audible.
And I know what you meant. That kind of like, it's funny. It's irreverent. I love that.
Oh, that book's great.
Type of writing. It is. Yeah. So what do you do when you're writing something and a different idea pops up? Do you continue writing and you put that idea aside, or can you work on two projects at the same time?
Well, I guess I'm lucky. I don't have a lot of ideas. Very few. They come few and far between. No, I tried not to write too many things at the same time. But when I am working on a longer thing like a novel, there's times I won't shelve it ever entirely. I do try to work from beginning to end if I can. But there's times where I sort of run into, you hit the wall. I come up with either a narrative problem or, things just aren't working. And I can put it aside and maybe work on something shorter. I've never worked on two longer pieces at the same time. I've heard of people who can work on 2 or 3 novels at the same time, and I don't know how you can keep all that in your head at the same time. I couldn't do it. But yeah, I can sort of bounce around if I have
to. Do you stick one? Obviously, you don't have one genre you work in. Do you have a favorite style that you write in, or do you like to dabble in multiple?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if this is really, what you call a genre, but I do think that my writing, it tends more towards the literary end, as a straight genre. I think a lot of genre stuff is labels that they use to sell a book, to market a book,
Mhm.
which I understand. And, there are people who are fans of certain genres that gravitate towards it, and they, there's certain things they look for in each type of thing. Um, but yeah, I mean, if you look at the two novels I've written, they are very different. But I bet if you look at it, you see that there's probably, certain themes that overlap and certain types of characters that overlap. So maybe it's not that different.
It also, I love stories about characters that have shady moral boundaries.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
it sounds like that's kind of an interest, something that you're working with both books. Like there are reasons that people are doing what they're doing, but
sure,
are
sure,
the reasons feel legitimate to the people that are doing perpetrating the acts, but are not necessarily morally
right,
correct. I just find that very interesting.
right. I mean, you know, I guess I don't know if it's easy or it's hard, but one thing I'm really not interested in doing is writing villains. People, a Hannibal Lecter or somebody like that who, like the reader sees this person is evil, he's irredeemable, he might be clever and say funny things, but they're really on the interior, there isn't a whole lot there. Most people aren't like that. Even the worst people we meet have some sort of interiority and yet their own internal logic where they don't necessarily think what they're doing is wrong. um, you know, Despite all the evidence to the contrary, but they still, to their own moral code, as much as you can call it that, try to do what they think is best.
Do you have any characters that were your favorites to write and why?
In this book, in this book,
In general, but in this book
know,
because it's so fresh in my mind. Yeah, let's stick with this one.
I mean, I favorite. I mean, I guess I got a kick out of writing character of Birdie. She was the mother of the two kidnappers,
Mm-hmm.
because she gets basically two sort of narratives. One is she throughout the book she gets her own little sections where she talks about her family history. She has this idea that if she kind of goes back far enough into her family history, she can figure out where it all went wrong, and she ended up with these two guys who ended up doing this crime. And then there's the scenes where she is now living with her adult son who's out of prison, and they have this very strange roommate. I mean, they're mother's sons, but they're roommates. And she's just this, she's a funny lady, but she's bitter. She's been, wronged in her life in a lot of different ways. So she was, I mean, I don't know if it was fun to write, but she was a really interesting character to get into. I like doing that in the book.
She was an interesting character, is an interesting character. Um, do you have anything that you're working on now for the future? Are you in the middle of anything or
I'm not in the middle of anything. I have, and this is interesting. I mean, I do want to get back into another longer work. I enjoy being in the process of it, even though it takes years. I like having something to sit down to work on. So I have ideas. I don't know how they're all going to tie together yet. So I'm just sort of like writing either a scene here or a character, and basically I'm trying to find the way into the story at this point. I don't know how to get into it. I think once I find that opening, then the rest of the book will sort of open up for me. But it's this very beginning. I couldn't even tell you what it's about really at this point.
do you have any literary heroes? Either they could be people you know, it could be someone that everyone knows.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, I guess we should mention it. We lost Cormac McCarthy yesterday.
I know.
So, I mean, and listen, I just read The Passenger,
Mm.
which I loved. It wasn't at all what I was expecting. But yeah, well, let's say Cormac McCarthy's definitely a legend. Yeah, it was kind of like finding out the Grand Canyon died. I don't know.
I
He's just such a
know.
big looming guy in a lot of letters.
Yeah.
But yeah, I tend to gravitate towards the idiosyncratic sentence writers, the really weird, like Barry Hannah and Grace Paley and Joy Williams and Diane Williams and Gary L. Lutz, Hal Braun, people like that who, really do funky stuff on a sentence level. And then, let's see, Philip Roth, Don DeLillo, people like
Mm.
that are always, just these massive, I mean, I wouldn't call them influences other than, they inspire me to write. But yeah, those are people I look up to. Sure.
And when did you realize you wanted to write?
Um, I mean, I guess I started, if we want to call it writing seriously, when I was in college as an undergrad. It was something that I was doing, and I was like, oh, this is something I could spend a lot more time doing. You know, I could do it. And that was actually the first time I ever took a creative writing class. So it seemed like, oh, this is something that isn't just a hobby. It's something that you can sort of pursue and do, you know, on a real serious level.
Well, I really want to thank you so much for sitting down. You know, this was a really pleasant surprise for me. I did not expect to be like every spare moment reading something. That's a
Oh,
first
that's
for
great.
me, actually. I thought it was great. So, yeah, do you have the book? Can you hold it up?
I don't, I don't. I gave my last review copy away, and it doesn't come out till July 1st. So
Okay, well, so not many we're aren't I get it. It's not out. I will put a little graphic when we do release, and I'll talk to you beforehand about getting some information so people can
oh,
get
absolutely.
it
Thank
and
you.
have a bit of a link, because it's really wonderful. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Kelly. It was awesome talking to you.